Compression is the process of automatically limiting the volume range so that the quiet parts can be made louder without causing clipping. All right, we've definitely talked about this in a previous video on compression, but let's dive in a little bit deeper, all right? It's also a form of modulation since it changes a sound signal over time. Now, of course, when we talk about compression, we're working with dynamics. Guys, winning with blends, of course, Justin Blends. If it's your first time here, like the video, why not? Subscribe to the channel. And let's dive in. So what we're going to do today is get into the multiband compressor. So first things first, what I'm going to do is I'm going to load an audio clip from my samples by clicking the plus and audio clip, then my files, then of course my samples, and I found my file right here. And as you see, the file has been loaded and we are in the session, okay? So let's talk about multiband compressor and multiband compression just on a whole, right? So this is essentially a group of several compressors. Let's load one up right now. So let's open up the multiband compressor. Okay, as you see, we've got it loaded right here. All right. So it's a series of various compressors, each of which operates on one section of the full audio spectrum. Of course, in this case, the low, the mid, the high, as you see these settings right here, low, mid, and high. And under the master tab, you'll see the width of the low, mid, and the high, as well as the low frequency, high frequency. And we'll get into this as we dive deeper. So the multiband compressor is a 3-band stereo compressor with essentially dynamic processing is what you're working with. So you can get your sounds to cut through the mix by adjusting the different compression settings from low, mid, and as well as the high band frequencies, as you see 1, again, 2, 3. All right. Now this may be particularly well suited for mastering complete mixes, but I would say when you're using it subtly on vocals and instruments, we can also achieve more dynamically, balanced sounding mixes that are more detailed because we can work with the separation, the stereo imaging, as I mentioned again in my stereo imaging video where I looked at the multiband compressor and how we can adjust these frequency ranges and widen them or narrow them depending on how we want to use it to look to create or to adjust and personalize our stereo image. Okay, so these 4 tabs, the low, mid, high, and master right up here, control the band frequencies and the split or the width and the overall output level. So of course the master, we're looking at pretty much a little bit more parameters just for the general settings, and then within you have the input gain, threshold, attack, release, and such, ratio, bypass, mute, on. We'll dive in a minute, right, as we go on. Okay, so the master, this essentially is the default set to master, and where you can essentially set the cutoff frequencies between bands, mix level, and overall gain. Okay, so let's start with, let's say, low. We got the low frequency right here. The low frequency, this is the crossover point to the start of the mid frequency point band. As you see, there's only low and high, and I'll explain this as I continue. And then high frequency right here is the mid frequency crossover point to the start of the high band. So what that essentially means is that the mid frequency band is defined by the frequency range between the low and the high cutoff settings. So we're only able to set the low frequency band and the high frequency band, and whatever's in between is automatically going to be the mid. It's pretty simple. It actually makes it very simple and quite intuitive actually, and it streamlines the process of narrowing or finding your bands. Find the low and find the high, and then you move on because the mid is just essentially what you haven't adjusted. So let's look at the width, all right? So of course we have low, medium, or mid, and high. So this is the stereo width for each of these 3 bands. Now up, as usual, up is to widen the band, and down is to narrow the band, okay? So this function relies pretty much on stereo information in your signal. So if there is no stereo in your input signal, then there pretty much is no information to widen. All right. Now let's look down here. We've got full and we've got safe. All right. we've talked about this before in a previous video, but let's just dive in. Why not? So full is referring to the extent of which the side or the stereo information can be isolated. So 100% to the top is going to widen it pretty much to the sides. And it essentially allows for a pure side signal in the mid-side processing of things, okay? As you see, I'm widening it. Guys, get some headphones on. I hope you can hear this very clearly. As you hear, I'm widening the mid. First of all, why don't we just set our low and high? So let's do that right now. Let's find the high. So what I'm going to do quickly is I'm going to solo the high, okay? And then so I went to the high band and I click solo. Whichever one you're focused on, that is the one that will be soloed if you do in fact engage solo. Okay, so let's go to high first. So we're engaging high, and let's go back to the master and let's locate our high frequency that we feel is the right range. I think that's about right for the purposes today. And let's go to low. So now we're focusing on low. Okay, as you see, low. Let's go back to the master and let's locate what we feel is the low frequency range. So what I'm going to do actually is I'm going to add an analyzer tool so we can better understand what we're doing and what the information is that we're getting in our signal. So let's adjust the low. I think that's about right. So let me disable solo. And there we go. So now we've got our low frequency range set and our high frequency range set for the bands. And of course, like I said earlier, the mid frequency band does not have to be selected or adjusted because it is automatically whatever you do not adjust. Okay, so we can adjust the stereo image by processing these components separately. The width, let's go to stereo right here, adjust my analyzer to stereo so we can see better what's happening. And we can adjust our width, okay, as we see fit. Now, we're going to dive in a little bit deeper, and you're going to notice how the stereo information in this field here is going to change as we dive deeper into the actual compression within these different bands, okay? So, essentially, we can adjust the stereo image by processing these components separately, right? This is often used in mastering, like I said earlier, and to improve the clarity and to create some spatial effects, but always check your mixes and your masters in stereo and mono to reveal the truths in what you're doing, okay? Now, let's go to safe mode. Remember, these extremes I was referring to are in full. So up is to widen it, make it very much to the sides in your mid-side mix. So check it out how it's very wide, guys. Listen, I'll make this exaggeratedly wide. Okay, do you guys notice that? It's very wide. Now let's narrow it down. So we're gonna bring this mid section, the high section, pardon me, and these bands down towards the middle. So you'll notice that the mix is getting more centered right here, guys. Watch the analyzer. It's very centered. It's clearly centered. Let's get this right back to the default, and we'll see. Let me boost up the input just a bit so we can get a little more information to make it a little, there we go. It's a little easier for you guys to see, okay? And it's much better just for working with. All right, but do be careful when you're using this and you're looking at your loudness. You have to make sure that you're possibly going back to 0 so that you can get the truth in the levels here, okay? But let's pump this back up a bit just for the purposes of this particular mix, all right? So back to this. So full mode we just covered. So let's go to safe mode. Now safe, which is recommended. I personally don't use safe. It's up to you guys. I do like the full functionality of having complete separation, defined stereo side and mid information. Now, at 100%, top or bottom, okay, the stereo width will be at a maximum. So users, let's say, of stereo separation tools in FL Studio Desktop may be familiar with this safe mode. So it's called safe because it won't go far or as far as the full will. So essentially, safe mode, these slider knobs go to about 75% of what the full mode would do. So you can never really get absolute extreme separation, which is also kind of weird, guys. It's hard to locate your sounds in space when they're fully maxed out and separated. Like, where's the sound? It's really odd, right? So But if I go to safe, look at that. It's at safe, maximum, and that's safe. Let me go to full. It's a very different story, right? Okay, let's look at the dry mix knob, all right? Now we're talking about gain staging. So this is useful to create parallel compression where a portion of the uncompressed signal can be blended with the heavily compressed signal. So let's get into some compression right in a moment, and then we'll start using the dry mix signal so that we can do our parallel compression. I also talk about parallel compression by using effect tracks, send effect tracks right here, right? You can always do that and send your mixes there and adjust the slider levels here, right? By sending your sounds to other effect channels and working with parallel compression that way. But today we're going to keep it simple by having our compressor directly on the master, on the instrument itself, in this case the song itself, and we'll deal with parallel compression within the multiband compressor. Okay, again guys, this is a remix, pardon me, a remaster I'm doing for an album that I created called Wolf Bites, and it was an album that was produced using the Nintendo DS KORG DS10, and it was fun. I have several albums in the series. I believe I've released perhaps 2 of them, so do check out my contact project linked below, and I'll drop a link to my Bandcamp so you guys can check that out. All right, so let's look at again the dry knob. So this, again, like I said, is good for creating parallel compression, which is beautiful. So it essentially controls the mix level of your compressed signal and the original signal. So pushing up the dry signal is going to blend in the uncompressed signal. All right, and we'll get into some compression as we go on with actual applying of compression within these separate bands. Okay, for now we're still on the master for now. So these low, mid, and high frequency bands, essentially they contain controls. So let's dive in. So of course we have the input gain. So if you wanted to add more bass, in this case low, pump that up. Do you guys notice the difference? Let's go to this spectrum. And let's drop this down. Let's drop it down. You see how the bass disappears slowly? Okay. Let's put it back up. It should get warmer. You guys can also see right in this window, right? You can see that the bass information is really low. But if I bring it back, you see the bass information, the low information becomes more present, okay? So the input gain, it controls the input level. Simple, all right? So how much of your signal in this range is entering into this effect module, all right? Now threshold sets the decibel level at which the compressor starts to act. Okay, right here. Now, with threshold, you're telling the plugin at what level to become active. So let's set our threshold here to a reasonable level. We're going to bring it down. As you see these transients right here, let's bring it down because I want to cut into this. And let's say, let me look at this signal right here, that peak right there. I just want to cut off essentially most of the top range of every single transient that's in this bass frequency range. So that would be the lowest, roughly. Maybe I could go a little bit lower to get a little bit more heavier compression, but let's kind of leave it like that for now. Okay, let's go into the mid and let's do the same. Let's find the range that we want. Okay, roughly the range. I'm going to cut into much of what we have in the mid range. There you go. For me, for now, that's okay. All right. And we'll listen back and we'll make adjustments as we go. And then the high frequencies as well, the high band, let's do the same thing. And let's make sure that we're cutting into every single transient, no matter how quiet or low that is present within the high band. And I won't go down so low because I don't want to squash this thing too much. I just want to make sure that all of the transients are going to be under control. And again, we'll make some adjustments with the dry mix to bring in more of the untreated, uncompressed sound to get a better mix and a better balance with our parallel compression. Okay, so essentially let's look at these. Let's start with the high. So the compressor will or will not be active depending on the type of audio material and the input signals level, right? So again, you can adjust the input if that's the case, or you can even lower the input. It's your choice, right? Okay, let's look at attack, right? So each of these has an attack, as you see, like all compressors will. And the attack is the amount of time taken to reach the full level of compression once the threshold level has been exceeded. Okay? So a fast attack means that the compression will be swift. So if I do a super fast attack, it's going to compress the audio much faster. Whereas compared to if I do a later or slower compression, slower attack time will allow some of the transients through before full compression is reached. And now this depends on the tempo and simply the time between your transients, right? So this is why I often recommend layering your compressors and using different kinds of compressors depending on what audio signals you're working with, because one compressor shouldn't ideally be handling the weight of your entire sound, because your transients can appear at different times and can also be at different levels. So to get a good balance, it's absolutely recommended to work with multiple compressors on any sound. It's up to you guys. Again, as I always say, use your ears, because that is the best teacher and the best indicator of what's happening. But these analyzer tools do help a lot as well. I think we can clearly see that. Okay, now let's go back here. And let's go back to high, okay? So I'm gonna put my attack to late, because I don't want it to cut in so fast. I really want this to be more gentle compression, and I may actually lower the threshold simply because I'm using a lower attack time. A higher attack time, which makes it slower. So it's not biting into the sound frequency so fast, okay? So the release time controls the amount of time the compressor takes to return to the normal setting or state once the level of the input signal has fallen below the threshold. So it hits above this white line, and once it goes below, how quickly is the compressor going to turn off? Do we want it to keep holding on and compressing more and more and more, or do we want it to let go really, really quickly and see if it can possibly let through some transients here and there, but get get some general control? It's up to you guys. I personally like to keep the attack high and the release low, at least if I have one compressor. That's the key for one single compressor. I'm going to bring this down just a little bit more. Okay? Just a little bit more. All right. So fast changes in gain may actually result in some distortion. So short release times will make compression more able to adapt to the input signal. But again, this may cause some distortion if your release times are too short, because it may just be cutting in and out really a little bit too quickly. It depends, right? Longer release times produce a more even signal with less distortion, but it makes it harder to maximize the overall compression because small variations in signal will be ignored. So if we just leave the release up high, we won't get such a great dynamic mix, because it's just taking way too long to let go, and it just kind of may flatten your mix. Guys, again, use your ears. It really depends, all right? Okay, so use the various layered compressors, like I said, to control your transients. And the transients are, of course, these peaks in your sound, right? So since simply one compressor's release and attack just may not grab a hold of every peak, and you may be letting through some peaks or some transients that you don't want, or you may be compressing all transients at a level that is just, again, flattening it. Okay, let's look at the ratio right here. All right, so I'm going to quickly set these. Let's just set these all as a default. I'm going to put this threshold down, make sure that they're all kind of in a similar setting so we can get a better idea, just kind of a general idea. Okay, so let's look at the ratio. Right, the ratio is right here. Right? It controls the gain reduction or the amount of compression that will be applied to the sound signal once the threshold level is reached. So the ratio denotes the difference in decibels between the input signal and the output signal, or the input levels and the output levels. So how much the signal above the threshold will be compressed. As you see, our threshold is set right here to minus 19 dB with this white line. So if you put your compressor to 4:1, the ratio, what that means is, let's set it to 4:1. What that means is that when the input signal increases by 4 decibels, the input level of the signal above the threshold will increase by 1 decibel. right? Let's just put them all to 2 or 3 to 1, but let's also use our eyes, okay? So I think 4 to 1 is reasonable. I think that's why we talk about oftentimes 4 to 1. It's a reasonable amount of compression, especially when you're looking at using parallel compression. But it depends. Listen to this. The high is being compressed too much. So let's bring this down. Let's bring this down. I think that's decent. Let's bring this back down a bit. Okay, that's fairly reasonable to me, all right? So let's look at the gain levels right here, okay? Each of these has a gain level, right? As you see, gain levels here, right? This gain level knob essentially separates into 3 bands, okay? So boost up the low, and let's boost up the high. Okay, let's also boost the mid. All right, so other settings within here, we have the on, BPS or bypass, mute, and solo. So each of these bands has activity switches where you can set either on, which is default, bypass, which means no compression. So right now the mid is not being compressed, and then mute, essentially it's just muting this particular band so you can focus on the low and the high. All right, as you see, it's grayed out. That denotes that the signal is not being processed. Okay, so the horizontal line shows the current threshold level, as you see here in the white. When the threshold is below the peaks, the input signal peaks will show gray above the threshold. Okay, let's bring this down so we can see that a little more clearly, perhaps. Okay. All right, you see these? You see that? Okay, let's bring this back up to a reasonable level, maybe about there. I think that's about reasonable. Okay. The variable line at the top of the display shows the amount of limiting when it dips down below the topmost position. Band activity status reflects on the graph. As you see here, per band, you can see the information per band. Okay, so when any band is muted, for example, the visualization, like I said, is going to simply turn gray. All right, so this tool is useful for mixing and mastering any sound. All right, so enjoy these per band flexible settings and take your recordings to the next levels, guys, to the next level, right? Let's dive in super quickly just so that we can actually get this thing going. So let's widen this a little bit. Let's see if we can widen this a bit. Let's add a little bit more input gain. Let's make sure that our levels are reasonable here, not topping out in any particular way, right? But we can always use this loudness setting here to ensure that we're not crossing those levels. So of course this is really loud and we're working on it, but I had to show you guys this. So maybe I'll adjust the input gain, or sorry, the dry mix, right, to find the right balance. Maybe widen the stereo a little bit for the high. Okay, and we'll dive in a bit more. I'll dive in a bit more and get this thing mixed and mastered up for you guys to enjoy. And I hope you guys enjoy this one, guys. I really do. Thanks for checking this one out, right? Winning with Blends, guys. Justin Blends. Let's win together. All right, follow the links in the description to join the community of musicians. Guys, it's free. Musicians around dropping links in the Discord. I think it's a great thing. Share your feedback in the comment section, guys, because as you know, I always read the information there and try to get back to you as quickly as possible with the best information that I possibly can. So I'm going to continue working on this mix, this master, and I hope to release this to you guys in the future so that you can actually check it out. All right, guys, watch this video on the classic compressor for even more in-depth information on these critical plugins. All right, all the best to you guys. Until next time, take it easy. All right.